I'm Autumn Lockett.
And this is Mitch Randall.
And you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. And on this episode, Autumn and I are going to catch up, talk a little bit about the sad news over the weekend. U.S. Representative John Lewis from Georgia passing away, an icon of the civil rights movement. And then later on in the podcast, we're going to be interviewing the Reverend June Joplin. Reverend Joplin recently came out to her congregation identifying as a transgender woman. And we conducted the interview prior to the news breaking recently that the congregation has actually now dismissed Reverend Joplin from employment. But we had an opportunity to speak to her before her firing. And it's really an enlightening and productive conversation. So you certainly want to make certain to stay tuned for that.
Are you worried that COVID-19 is going to put off your plans for theological education? The Baptist Seminary of Kentucky is offering a full schedule online this fall. Our approach to online education is unique, offering classes live and face-to-face via Zoom. At BSK, relationship is critical, and we are thrilled to be able to offer our Master of Divinity, Pastoral Care Certificate, and Rural Ministry Certificate this way. Learn more at bsk.edu.
Autumn, how are things this week?
Things are going well. I've noticed something kind of interesting, though.
Oh, please do tell.
Yeah, since being cooped up, I found that, first of all, my dreams are way more vivid. And second of all, I'm a total travel bug in my dreams. I've been to Salzburg. I've been to New York City. I've been to Venice.
Wow.
I think my subconscious is super bored of my house.
Your subconscious passport is getting all kinds of stamps. That is fantastic. So what happens when you go to these exotic places in your dreams? I mean, do you eat food? Do you drink
It's always
wine?
Christmas.
It's always Christmas. There you go.
I mean, it's like the opposite of Narnia, basically. So it's always Christmas. No one's wearing a mask, but there is no pandemic, and so we're doing that safely. And it's just been so interesting how I feel like I'm handling this really well on the outside, but I think inside my brain is just reeling.
Right. No. Well, that sounds absolutely lovely. So those are nice little vacations every night.
And cheap.
And cheap. That's exactly right. Yeah, I was looking on the calendar.
How are y'all doing?
We're doing well. I was looking at the calendar yesterday, and it popped up that I was supposed to be in Brazil this week.
I'm supposed to be at Glacier National Park this week.
That's right. It's kind of like, womp,
womp.
Exactly. But no, we're doing well. We've created this little oasis in our backyard that we've been able to go out and get away a little bit. The weather here in Oklahoma has taken a little bit of a cooler turn. And when I say cooler, lower 90s instead of hundreds. So the evenings have been pleasant. Right. Old man winter showed up in July. But no, it's been pleasant. Still just trying to figure out what the future is, and really nobody can tell. Still have my two adult sons here. My youngest son trying to figure out what he's going to do for college in the fall. He attends Dartmouth College up in New Hampshire. They've gone to potential virtual for some students being on campus. So just trying to figure out what the next step for him is. And then my oldest son is trying to get back to California as quickly as possible. But as the newspapers continue to indicate, LA is shut down or is about to shut down because of the increase in cases. So we're just, kind of in this holding pattern, circling the airport, trying to figure out when to land. But at any rate, it is good. Still trying to wrap my head around the discussion that is taking place across the country as school approaches. We talked a little bit about that this week, or last week, I should say. And one of the things I am really excited about Good Faith Media. Good Faith Media is in our second pre-production of our Good Faith Forums. Our Good Faith Forums address social justice issues and critical issues of the day. We are about to complete our first series of Good Faith Forums, and those Good Faith Forums were on racial justice. Sessions 1 and 2 you can find at our Good Faith Media Facebook page as well as our website. And our third and final session on racial justice will air live on Facebook Live this coming Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And the subject matter is going to be police reform. And our moderator is the Reverend Dr. Terrell Carter from Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois. A wonderful, wonderful theologian, administrator, but also is a former police officer. And so, if you have an opportunity, tune in next Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern for that discussion. And speaking of police reform, a lot of strange things happen across the country right now, especially in Portland, Oregon. I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news there, but kind of unmarked police vans rolling up on protesters and pulling them in to these vans, identified now as federal police enforcement. A lot of, kind of strange behavior. And then the president announced a couple of days ago that he's planning on sending more of those forces into Chicago and Detroit and New York City. It's getting kind of scary, to be quite honest with you, that the federal government is utilizing federal forces to disperse protesters, and especially peaceful protesters, bringing them in for questioning, and then taking them to places that, who knows where they might end up.
Mm-hmm. They're occupying their own country.
Yeah, it really does make one pause. So we're hoping that cooler heads prevail. We're hoping that congressional leadership will step in and demand to know what exactly is going on.
We need some accountability and some oversight here.
Right, absolutely. And if they're not willing to do it, what we discovered this week is that moms and dads will step in.
Yeah, we will. We're not afraid of tear gas. Bring it on.
Yeah. Did you see the moms interlinking arms in Portland, standing between protesters and federal forces? And then the next night, dads show up inspired by the moms with leaf blowers blowing tear gas away from this. It really does sound like, a Brave New World or,
Exactly. I feel like honestly, Mitch, for the past 10 years, all young adult lit is like post-apocalyptic fiction.
Right.
And so I feel like our generation, we're ready. Like we're ready to do this. We're fully read up on how to handle this situation.
Yeah.
We've read all the Hunger Games and we're ready.
Right. Well, my generation thought it was just fiction until 2016 rolled around. And then we thought, how worse could it get? And then 2020 said, here, hold my beer.
Exactly. And here we are.
It is such a bizarre world we live in. And so, but I am thankful for our church. I'm thankful for our core group of friends. It's only through the people that listen to this podcast, that support Good Faith Media, and our family and friends that gives us any solace and hope for tomorrow. And so I'm really trying to lean into that, not get too discouraged and depressed about what I see going across our country, and really be rejuvenized to, shall we say, get into some good trouble.
Yeah.
We lost a giant this weekend, Autumn. Only stood 5'6", but his shadow.
I didn't know that until I read that in your article. I always pictured him as like at least 7.5 feet tall.
Well, he lived 7.5 feet tall, no doubt.
That's true. Yeah.
Golly, U.S. Representative John Lewis from Atlanta passed away. Civil rights icon, was one of the big six during the civil rights movement, one of the last living speakers at the Great March on Washington, was there on Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama as they crossed the Edmund Pettit Bridge, was beaten by state law enforcement, was a freedom rider. The list goes on and on to what John Lewis was able to accomplish and stand for in his life, and also a Baptist preacher, American Baptist preacher, and just a huge void is left in the universe because of his passing. Now, did you know much about Representative Lewis?
I really didn't, and I've really felt like I missed out as I've read more about his life in the past week.
Yeah. Growing up here in Oklahoma, of course, not a whole lot of in-depth education on civil rights. We've talked about that before. Was never taught about the 1921 race massacre here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But also, we talked about the civil rights movement, but usually the emphasis was placed on Dr. King and what surrounded, his work and his sermons and the movement. But not a whole lot of emphasis was placed upon others that surrounded him, who pushed the movement and really did a lot of the legwork to stand up for civil rights. And so I did not, as you did not come to learn of John Lewis's story until later on in life. Had very fortunate circumstance to hear him speak on a couple of occasions. Read his book, Walking with the Wind, which he signed for me. It's a cherished prize of mine. Mm-hmm. But just such an extraordinary individual, a person who has encouraged us to get into good and necessary trouble. And wrote an article about it today. It was released Thursday of this week, talking about the importance of getting into good trouble, that not only should our words be vocalized and standing up for racial justice, but we need to lace up our shoes and get to marching and get to work, because actions and words must always go together, as the scriptures teach us.
Absolutely. And that it's okay to go against the status quo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I had a conversation, speaking of the status quo, and I'm really frustrated. And so forgive me if I get on this perch here for a second, but I'm getting more and more frustrated with the white church. I've had conversations a lot with our colleagues, and our white clergy colleagues are having a growing frustration within their congregations as they speak out on racial justice issues and denounce white supremacy. They preach out against white privilege and try to call people's attention to this and systemic racism. They are getting a lot of criticism from their congregations of talking about racial justice week in and week out. And my words to those pastors have been, you can't stop talking about it. I don't care if your congregations are getting discouraged by those sermons and that emphasis and are tired of hearing it. They need to hear it. This is the moment that America needs to face and be honest about the original sin of this country that has never, ever been washed away and dealt with. We've got to deal with it to move on, to make this a more perfect union. And so I'm getting really frustrated with the white church right now, especially the white moderate and some progressive churches who want to talk about it for a couple of weeks. And they'll attend a march or two, but then it's like, we need to get back to our, the status quo. And it's like, no, this is a pivotal moment. We've got to do something at this time and at this juncture. So I just want to say an encouraging word to all of you pastors out there who are finding yourself struggling, facing criticism in your local congregations. Just want you to know that at Good Faith Media, we support you. We support your message. We know that,
and you're on the right side of history. You're doing the right thing.
You're doing the right thing. Absolutely.
You're in great company.
That's right. And we know it's difficult, and you have tough decisions to make because it can become daunting. I was a pastor for over 20 years, and there are a lot of things that you have to think about and factor into those decisions and what you say from the pulpit. But I just want to give you a word of encouragement if you're listening today. You're doing great. Keep up the good work. Keep up the good fight. And in the words of John Lewis, continue to get in that good and necessary trouble. It is bending the arc of the moral universe, and it is bending towards justice. Keep doing it.
Absolutely. In fact, you take those parishioners and you just send them to autumn at goodfaithmedia.org and I'll handle them for you.
There you heard it, friends. Autumn is willing to stand in the gap for you. Just send them her way, and she's got all kinds of retorts for them. I can't wait to see what happens.
We'll just have some school is what we'll do. I'm a former teacher. My teacher voice is a little bit stifled right now, so we'll just have some school.
Well, great. Well, again, we want to extend our sympathy to the Lewis family, but also just take a moment to remember the greatness of John Lewis and everything he did. So if you're listening wherever you are in the country or around the world, let's take 30 seconds to pause and remember John Lewis and everything that he did for this country and hopefully continues to inspire us to do in this country. Let's continue to get into some good and necessary trouble. Thank you for taking that time to remember John Lewis. And now we want to turn to our interview with Reverend June Joplin. Reverend Joplin, as I mentioned early on in the broadcast, recently came out to her congregation in Toronto, or outside of Toronto, Canada, that she was identifying as a transgender woman. It was a very brave and bold thing to do, and she is also a member of our strategic board here at Good Faith Media, and we fully support her and what she is doing in her ministry. But recently, her congregation decided to fire her. The interview that was conducted with Reverend Joplin occurred prior to that firing, so we do not mention it in the interview, but we wanted to make you aware that that is the case as of now. So stay tuned and listen to the interview with Reverend June Joplin. Ethics Daily and Nurturing Faith are coming together and joining forces to launch Good Faith Media. Is that not exciting?
I am pumped. I'm so excited. We've been planning this and scheming and dreaming, and it's finally coming to fruition.
Well, we're really excited to roll out the new website, hoping that everybody will get a chance to log on to goodfaithmedia.org starting July the 1st. But there's also something we want to invite a lot of our good friends to be a part of, and that is the Good Faith 50. So, Autumn, tell us a little bit about the Good Faith 50.
The Good Faith 50 is a group of our friends who want to support us. And our goal is to grow our monthly members, so our folks who donate to the mission of Good Faith Media, which is to provide resources and reflection at the intersection of faith and culture through an inclusive Christian lens. We want to invite the people who believe in that mission to become monthly donors. And our goal in July and August is to grow our monthly donors by 50.
That is absolutely awesome. We welcome anybody who wants to be a part of the Good Faith crew in the months of July and August. And all they need to do is go to goodfaithmedia.org, hit the donate button, and then select to become part of the Good Faith 50 and a monthly donor at any level. And we would love to hear from you. And we appreciate, as always, your support. Your contribution helps us publish new articles each and every day. It also helps us produce short documentaries and allows us to cover stories across the country. It helps us publish more books and provide more experiences for more people of faith. We are trying to advance a faith that is inclusive for all, providing justice for all and freedom for all. So make certain you sign up on Good Faith 50 at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly, and on this episode, we have a very special guest with us, one of our very own strategic board members, the Reverend June Joplin. Reverend Joplin is the pastor of Lorne Park Baptist Church in Mississauga, Ontario. She is a graduate of Appalachian State University and Baptist Theological Seminary in Richmond. She hails from the great state of North Carolina.
She recently disclosed to her congregation, live over Zoom, I need to add, that she was announcing after a lifetime of hiding her true self that she was coming out and identifying as a transgender female. June, as I said a moment ago, is a very active member in Good Faith Media. She's part of the Strategic Advisory Board. And I must add, because we have this in common, June, she is a super hockey fan. So, June, welcome.
That's right.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks. It's so good to be here. And thanks for that lovely introduction.
Yeah,
absolutely.
excellent. We really wanted to just, of course, first and foremost, welcome you to the pod. Thank you for being so brave and courageous. Can't imagine. It's hard enough to preach a sermon over live Zoom, I've heard from our pastor friends. So that's a lot to be bringing to the pulpit on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Before we dive into that moment, though, can you talk a little bit about your background and discuss how you emotionally, intellectually, theologically came to the conclusion of identifying as a transgender woman?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like Mitch said, I am from North Carolina. I'm from a very small town, about an hour and a half to the northwest of Charlotte, North Carolina. So, hour and a half from Charlotte, hour from Asheville, just kind of that area. And 3,000 or 4,000 people. With 3,000 or 4,000 people, there were probably 300 or 400 Baptist churches. So everybody's Baptist, mostly.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, and I would say, with a few exceptions, maybe like the First Baptist Church in the city limits might have had like some formal affiliation with the Southern Baptist Convention, but otherwise it was mostly just kind of different brands of functionally fundamentalist independent churches. And the church I grew up in certainly identified that way. My mother has a copy of the bulletin from the week after I was baptized, and it lists that, I was baptized the week before. And there's actually an article in the bulletin that says, here is why we prefer to call ourselves a fundamentalist church. So like when I say it was a fundamentalist church, I mean like they
were a bragging fundamentalist church.
Yeah, it wasn't like people from the outside were like, y'all are fundamentalists. They were like, yes, we're fundamentalists and we love that and here's why. So, and that was irrelevant to me as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, or even as a member of the youth group. It just, I didn't know. So I grew up in that world where it just would have been unthinkable for anyone to say, I think that maybe I was supposed to be a girl. We're talking about the mid 80s, early 90s, graduated from high school in like 1996, university in 2001. So it's remarkable how much the world has changed really just in the last 10 years. But back then it would have been next to impossible for a young child to come out. That's not impossible these days. One of the really amazing letters of support I got is from a colleague down in the South who has a 9-year-old trans girl in his Baptist church, and it's been an amazing story. And I celebrate news like that and love news like that, but at the same time, there's always going to be this sense of kind of envy is maybe not the right word, but grief that like, oh wow, like she is growing up the way I did or the way I should have. I would have never, I didn't have any concept of what transgender was or what it meant to be transgender. I wouldn't have realized at the time that it's much more of an umbrella, or it's transgender people come in a lot of different shapes and sizes and types. Transition can look very different for different people. Yesterday was International Non-Binary Day. Several of my very good friends, including my first therapist, who was the first person ever to use the right pronouns for me, is non-binary. And non-binary folks are transgender, but they're not, some of them are not transgender in that they're, seeking, there may not be like a medical component to their transness. They may not make dramatic changes in the way they present to the world. So I didn't know, for all I knew, either transgender identities didn't exist, or as I started to learn a little bit about them, like in the context of maybe like a Phil Donahue show or a Jerry Springer show,
Right.
They were mostly just presented as, they were stigmatized, to put it mildly. And there was kind of a narrative of like, feeling trapped in the wrong body. And that's not necessarily a narrative that I identified with. There was the implication that transition necessarily involved a lot of surgeries that, would cost a lot of money and would only be available to a very select kind of elite few. And so the little that I understood about trans people would have suggested to me that like it was just something that very, very few people who were really, really trans, that was my way of thinking back then, got to do. And like, for me, it was just, this is just some weird thing, this weird inclination that if I know what's good for me, I keep it to myself. It's a phase. I'll grow out of it. Everything will be okay by the time I grow up. I was wrong.
Yeah, sure. Now, I mean, obviously you grew up in North Carolina, you went to school in Virginia. You've been a follower of Jesus for, sounds like, most of your life.
As long as I can remember.
In the church, there are so many constructs that have been built over time based upon social constructs, theological constructs. As you grew older and began to understand who you were and identified as a female, how big a part did these social constructs that have been created by the church and by society play a part and put pressure on you not to reveal who you truly were?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. The church, as a lot of us know it in North America, is profoundly heteronormative, right? Yep. I was talking to a friend of mine just recently about how like it's hard to be a single male pastor. If you're going to go get a job at a church, they really, if two candidates are equal and one has a wife and kids and one doesn't, the wife and kids is going to put you over the top, because there's true. Just this. Yeah. We have up on a pedestal, as if it is an idol, this notion of wife and two kids as the norm for society, and we want our pastors to look absolutely normal. And I put quotes around normal. Right. And there are some folks that theologically would say that that's the only proper purpose. I know there are some conservative Southern Baptists who would say if you get into adulthood and you're not married and you're childless, you are not fulfilling God's purpose for how God created you, which is just preposterous. But even among those churches, some of the more moderate to progressive members of the Christian family might not say that, but if they were evaluating a couple of pastoral candidates, the one who, like I said, had the wife and kids is going to get the job, because there's a profile that we really, really want pastors to fit. I've said to my friends, like, people really want their pastor to look like the kind of person they would get a bank loan from. And so if you don't look like the kind of person who would have your picture in a bank lobby saying like branch manager, then there are a lot of churches that are not going to want you just because of that. Yeah. I have a lot of LGBTQ plus identified friends who, I joke about how I look like their boring aunt whenever we hang out, because their gender presentation might be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum between what we would consider very masculine and very feminine. They might do just something different with their hair. One of my best friends has purple hair on top and shaved on the sides and uses they, them pronouns. And I love them so much, but that, I've said to them, when we hang out, people are going to think I'm really lame compared to you, because they live in the city, and, they're the type of person who, churches are going to look sideways at just because of they don't fit this profile. And the profile is kind of the way I describe it. Like, it's pervasive and it's almost unspoken. But I recognized kind of intuitively, as I began to pursue a calling into ministry, that there was a certain, I mean, it's not hard to look at, take any denomination, take my home denomination in the United States and look at all the people that are pastoring the most prominent churches, and they all look exactly the same, or at least like 95% the same. Mm-hmm. And so it's not hard to see those folks and say, I need to be that if I'm going to have a career. And if I don't conform, I'm just going to have to take what's left over.
So June, with all this outside construct that the church has built, that culture has built, obviously that put amounts an incredible amount of pressure on you. And I've heard the same story from other LGBTQ plus individuals. So there had to be this process you went through, and this moment in time where you drew the conclusion, absolutely 100%, this is who God created me to be. Can you walk us through that a little bit? What that must have been like?
Sure. Yeah, sure. It was a journey that required growth, transformation, maturity in like every aspect of my life. Mm-hmm. Theologically, politically, emotionally, psychologically, rather. Sure. All these things had to evolve from where they would have been when I was a teenager at a really conservative church, or even when I was like 20 years old and still hadn't really, I was beginning to, I guess, recognize that there were other ways to be Christian, and in my case, other ways to be Baptist. Mm-hmm. I got very fortunate in getting connected to congregations that weren't just the country fundamentalist church, or just, I won't say country fundamentalist, but they weren't that
right.
Very narrow conservative expression of Baptistness that I'd grown up with. And
sure.
Yeah, so I had to grow to, one of the first things I had to figure out was just that women could be ministers. I wasn't raised with that sensibility. And I guess I was in my 20s before I ever encountered a woman in the pulpit and heard a woman preach a sermon and just thought, this is amazing. And I had questions about it because I had been taught to have questions about it. And I can remember as a kid, I think it was one of my uncles or somebody I went to church with was talking about as I recall, it was some mission program that one of the Methodist churches, one of the few churches that wasn't Baptist in my county.
It's always those Methodists,
right? Yeah, right. I think they were Methodist, and like I said, 300 or 400 Baptist churches in my home county, and right. Methodists being good, sensible people will put like one or two churches in a city, and so there weren't very many. And one of the ones in my county had a woman pastoring, and this man was describing, I don't know what it was. They were like volunteering at the soup kitchen or like collecting money for some missionary. And they were like, they're doing this relief work and they got a woman pastor, like as if like having a female pastor meant that you were, I don't know, like conspiring to make the world a worse place and not actually doing acts of service. It was just mystifying to them that they could possibly be doing anything that looked like a normal church because they were doing this thing that was so clearly against their. Right. So that was kind of what I grew up in, and it took me a long time to evolve past that. And it became clear eventually, as I was kind of a witness to the struggle for LGBTQ plus equality in the church, that these fights were pretty similar. That a lot of the handling of scripture that says women can't do anything outside the nursery or the kitchen is the same handling of scripture that says we can't let LGBTQ plus folks in our churches, right. Or they can't be leaders, or they have to repent and change who they are to be fully accepted in the church. And it's interesting how you can trace, again, like I've come to discover, and I didn't learn this growing up, but I mean, our history as folks rooted in the Southern Baptist Convention is a history of white supremacy. 1845, Augusta, Georgia, a bunch of slave holding or pro-slavery pastors get together and say, we need a convention where slavery's okay.
Yeah.
Because the Bible says slavery's okay.
Right.
So the Southern Baptist Convention was founded as a white supremacist organization justified by scripture. And
say it again, louder, please.
Well, they were. And, it occurs to me that they didn't change as far as I can tell because they grew theologically. They changed because their founders lost a war.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually they had to say, well, we can't read the Bible. We can't read the book of Ephesians that says slaves submit to your masters the same way because the government is making us, free slaves.
Right.
And we lost. And, but they
so
said,
they created
that other
Jim
thing
Crow
in
instead.
Ephesians. Yeah. Well, yeah, they did. That's very true.
Yeah.
But the other thing in Ephesians, it says, wives submit to your husbands. We're gonna read that just as literally as we used to read, slaves submit to your masters.
Right.
But at some point, good faith Christians will looked and said, wait a minute, we were really wrong about that in terms of race relations and white supremacy. And even you can go back even further beyond that to colonialism. We were wrong about that. We were wrong about that. We were wrong about that. With this LGBTQ plus stuff, we are absolutely right about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way we're making the same mistake that we did again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
So I guess I started to recognize that in seminary. One of my favorite staff members at the seminary I went to lost his job, not for being LGBTQ plus, but for just being a really good ally. And his dedication to stand in solidarity if it wasn't even that we had folks who were openly or identified as LGBTQ plus, but his dedication to stand in solidarity with those students if that happened, totally hypothetical, but it put him on the wrong side of the president of the seminary, so he had to leave. And I saw that, and I've been seeing stuff like that for 20 years.
Right.
And it seemed wrong to me then. Back then, it was explained to me that if we try to fight for LGBTQ plus inclusion, we're going to lose everything we ever advocated for women in ministry, and we can't afford. It was basically pitting one marginalized group against another, which is really I don't know, near the front of the patriarchal playbook, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
But in those days, almost 20 years ago, I accepted that. I was like, yeah, they're probably right. We can only, we got to wait. If this ever becomes an issue, we just got to put it off. We got to put it off another decade. We got to put it off another 15 years. And all along the way, I was kind of evolving myself.
Yeah.
So
it sounds like it was a kind of a lifetime process for you, both emotionally, intellectually, theologically. And so, it's a beautiful story. And, I'm glad that, we're at a point now and you have drawn this conclusion. You're able to live your life openly and profess who you truly are as God created you. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
So at the risk of going off script for just a minute, we can edit this part out much if we want to. I think you are so uniquely positioned to really speak to some of those gender roles that you've addressed, especially when it comes to church. And I have a lot of conversations. I have 2 boys and 2 girls, my children. And so, we work really hard, my husband and I, to not assign pronouns to who their spouses may be and little things like that we think, to have a really open space. But at the same time, I do feel like I have to teach my girls a little bit differently than I teach my boys. And now that you have walked around in our stunning heels, do you feel that as someone who's stood in both kinds of shoes?
Yeah, absolutely. Gender is really complicated. There are biological and sociological and psychological components. I heard somebody say not long ago, gender is biopsychosocial. So depending on, I would say that in a lot of ways, biologically, I'm female. My hormone levels are probably have a higher estrogen level than the average 41-year-old female, and maybe a lower testosterone level. And one of the things you learn is that, a lot of folks will say, well, your genes, your DNA, your chromosomes. And you're like, well, your chromosomes aren't the things that give you secondary sex characteristics. It's your hormones. And so there's a biological component. There's research that suggests the neurological activity of trans people is very closely aligned to the neurological activity of cis people. So a trans woman's brain, as best we can tell, and we can't tell everything, works a lot like a cis woman's brain. So there's that component, but then that social component is the part where, like, saying, hello world, I'm a woman at 41 years old, means that there's a lot I missed out on.
Right. Like your mom didn't teach you how to put your keys between your fingers whenever you're walking in a dark parking lot.
No, she didn't. And in fact, I was a fairly intrepid, teenager and young adult, and would just, I had a friend that we would just go anywhere, anytime, and not really worry about that. And now, like, in some sense, I'm glad I had that experience of socialization. But boy, there's a lot that I wish I knew. And it's going to take a while, and it's going to be strange learning some of these lessons at 40, 41.
Sure.
But what I hear from a number of my trans friends is, they come with time. You're probably emotionally, in some sense, you might be emotionally better equipped to learn these things in middle adulthood than you might have been when you were 13 years old.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I don't know. Like, that's the thing that, and there are parts of the social aspect of womanhood that I relate to without having had direct experience. I recorded a reflection for the Metropolitan Community Church here in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and they asked each Sunday during June, they asked a different woman to just reflect on what womanhood means to them. And they asked me because they wanted to get a trans woman, and they thought it would be really interesting to get somebody who had just come out a couple of weeks ago. And I shared a story that I read in this wonderful book called The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls by Mona Eltahawy. She's an Egyptian-American activist who uses the term sins, not in like the Christian moral sense, but she's basically saying, here are qualities that women and girls are socialized not demonstrate that they need. Things like ambition and anger and knowing when to command attention. One of the things she talked about was how, especially in the context of like sexual assault, women's testimonies tend not to be taken seriously, and there are really grim statistics about a lot of that stuff. In terms of what percentage of victims even go forward, and then what percentage of victims there's anything like justice. And so that sense that, like, you can tell the truth, but like the world will say, well, you're a girl, we don't believe you. Mm-hmm. I can identify with that a little because I spent many years with this voice inside me saying, you're supposed to be a girl, and right, with a louder voice inside me saying, no, that can't be true.
Wow.
You need to put your head down. You need to quote unquote, man up. You need to get through this. And this thing that deep down inside is true, you absolutely cannot take it seriously. It is not to be trusted. And so I think the sense in which, women and girls are kind of socialized not to take their intuition seriously. Sure. Is I kind of identify with that.
Yeah, you experienced that on a very deep level, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's different, but it's relatable, I hope.
Yeah.
And I want to learn more and more as I go. I'm certainly open to that.
We certainly have taught us a lot. Now, Jen, I want to shift gears a little bit and take you back to that Sunday in June where you announced to your congregation that you're identifying as a transgender female. There is this, and I cannot overstate this enough, there is this beautiful, beautiful photo of your son embracing you immediately after the live feed went dead. I can't imagine what was going through your heart and your mind and your soul up to that Sunday, but then immediately following that Sunday. And that photo of your son embracing you was just so powerful. Can you tell us a little bit about what that moment was like?
Sure. Well, I was terrified going into that Sunday. I was, my plan, of course, would have been to come out in the pulpit and, in person. COVID disrupted that. But then, like so many of us are doing during this season of COVID, we had to adapt. And some of us are finding, well, this is bad, but we can find ways to make it work, even to our advantage. And so I realized, even though it is the case that every sermon I've ever preached at Lorne Park, minus a few with like technical glitches, has been put out on the World Wide Web. So like you can hear anything I've ever preached, like it's out there. But this sermon had a potential to have a wider reach. Nonetheless, I was just terrified. I was wondering,
and understand,
what if they cut off my microphone? What if somebody stops me and says, okay, wait, we can't do this. What if there's a message waiting for me at the end of the service that says you're fired? I didn't know. I just had no idea what was going to happen. And it just felt like the supreme risk. But at the same time, like it felt very necessary. Like I had managed to repress so effectively for so long, but once I became self-accepting, it got to the point where it was excruciating hiding. I would even say like I repressed so well for so long, I wouldn't have even considered that I was hiding.
Sure.
But it was such a relief to finally just get it out of the way. This is not, it's not a specter anymore. It's not hidden anymore. People might love it. They might hate it. They might celebrate it. They might lament it, but it's out there. And
well, how has the response been after that Sunday?
Well, it's been mixed. The part of what I'm experiencing is that the people who want to reach out to me are the people who think this is wonderful news. So I think the folks who could answer that question better would be like, the church council, the folks who are kind of leading us very, with a lot of wisdom and grace through this process of kind of discernment. I have heard, with very few exceptions, overwhelmingly loving and positive and affirming responses. I got, I woke up this morning to an email from my youngest son's hockey coach saying, I saw you on the news, and I think that's amazing, which is cool because my other son's hockey coach messaged me a couple of weeks ago. And like that's a space that I was awkward about stepping back into.
Sure.
I got a letter yesterday from someone here in Mississauga whose daughter just transitioned and is at university, and she was saying, I support her, but I see that she's really anxious about taking her first steps out into the world as herself, and your message is giving us such hope. I've heard from folks who said, like, I had kind of closed the door on faith because of the church's track record with, harming LGBTQ plus folks, and you've inspired me to rekindle my faith or start praying for the first time in decades, or stuff like that.
Sure.
I've had a few church members that have said, as they've gotten to know me, and that's still, we're only a month into this, and I haven't been in the pulpit the last couple of weeks, so it's been mostly like one-to-one interactions. I've had a few church members that have said, we think you're better than ever. We feel like we know you now in a way that we never did before. And there are a few folks that are excited as we envision a possible future together. there's still a lot of unknowns, but
Sure.
There is a lot of cause for hope.
Good. That's a good word. That is a good word.
Yeah, that's a very good word. So what advice can you give to any transgender females and males waiting to come out?
Well, yeah, if you're trans, goodness, that's a great question. I mean, I could repeat some of what I said in my sermon. You know, if you have been made to feel broken or less than or sinful or anything like that by the church, you have been lied to, and that evil language has hurt and sometimes led to the deaths of LGBTQ plus folks.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I'm sorry that you've been lied to by the church. I believe in a God that knows your name. I believe in a God that knew you as a trans person from the moment you were born. Even if it took you 40, 50, 60 years to come to that. But if you're one of those fortunate folks coming to that realization much younger, I believe God knows you. God didn't make a mistake on you. I know you might hear that from some religious folks in your life, but it's not true any more than it's, you know, God made a mistake on people that need hip replacements or shoulder surgeries or to take blood pressure medication. You know, we all kind of, there aren't very many of us that have pure, unadulterated, unmodified bodies. And yeah, God knows you and calls you by name. And if people in your life are not accepting and they say, well, you're always going to be our son or you're always going to be our daughter, God sees you for who you are as a beloved daughter, a beloved son, or a beloved non-binary child, neither male nor female. You know, God sees you for what you are, and you don't have to listen to. You don't have to accept as arbiters of faith, as people who tell you what Christianity is about, those folks who are telling you you're wrong. There are other voices, and whether you find those voices or not, you just need to know that sometimes the loudest voices sharing opinions about what the Bible says or what Christianity has to say about transgender people are also some of the wrongest voices. So don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about.
I had the privilege of watching live the Sunday morning in June where you announced to your congregation. It was a beautiful, challenging, affirming sermon that I think every Christian needs to hear. So is that link available for people to see?
Yeah, there sure is. I have a personal link to just the sermon, which is maybe 18 to 22 minutes of the worship service. And then at the church's website, the full worship service from June 14th is available. And it's like an hour and 10 minutes.
Okay, well, we'll get that link
on YouTube. Yeah,
we'll get that link and we'll put it in our comments so that
that's great.
People can link to it, because it's a fantastic message, and just cannot encourage people enough to take 15 minutes, 20 minutes of their time to listen to this incredible message. Well, June, we are so proud of you here at Good Faith Media. We love you. We're looking forward, as we launch this company together, the future that we can have in culture, making certain that people practice good faith. But before we let you go, because we know that you got a busy schedule these days, Autumn has a question that she asks every one of our guests to conclude our interview. So Autumn, take it away.
Of course, yeah. So our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So what is your more to tell?
That transgender Christians are real. We exist. We're human beings. When your congregation or your faith community is debating about issues of acceptance and affirmation, you're not debating about an abstract hypothetical issue. It's not who wrote Genesis or should we use wine or grape juice at communion. There are lives at stake. They're human beings, and I'm one of them. And there are people in your communities that you can listen to, we're there. So find us, get to know us. Many of us, self-included, just want to be out there so folks can see that this is nothing to be afraid of or nothing to feel challenged by. So much of what the church has to say about LGBTQ plus folks and about trans people in particular indicate that they don't know a single trans person. Yep. And aren't interested in really getting to know them. It's all just theoretical, hypothetical. It's the specter out there in the ether, but we are flesh and blood. And we're here, we exist, and a lot of us really love Jesus.
Oh, Reverend June Joplin, thank you so much for joining us at Good Faith Weekly. We wish you the best of health and the best of ministry in the future, and just thanks for being you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's been a real delight to be on today.
Well, thank you again for tuning in to Good Faith Weekly. And as always, as we sign off, we want to make certain to remind you that wherever you are in the world, make certain you're